The email notification lit up my phone at 2:47 a.m. Another research proposal, another desperate plea for funding. This one came from Dr. Marcus Chen at Stanford, the same Marcus Chen who'd laughed me out of his organic chemistry class 15 years ago, telling me I should focus on my strengths instead of pretending to understand complex molecular structures. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. His proposal was requesting $2.3 million for a breakthrough cancer treatment study. I smiled as I typed my response, approved. Full funding granted. Best regards, Dr. Sophia Mitchell, CEO, Mitchell Biotech Foundation. Some people never forget a face. I will never forget a slight. The first time someone told me I was too pretty to be smart, I was 7 years old. Mrs. Henderson, my second grade teacher at Riverside Elementary in Denver, Colorado, handed back our math tests with a frown, creasing her weathered face. While other kids celebrated their gold stars, she lingered at my desk, studying my perfect score with suspicious eyes. "Did someone help you with this at home, sweetie?" she asked, her voice dripping with false concern. "It's okay if your parents helped. We just want to make sure you're learning at your own pace." I shook my head, confused. "No, Mrs. Henderson. I did it myself. Math is easy." She exchanged a knowing look with the classroom aide. "Well, aren't you just a little doll? Maybe we should have you focus more on art and reading. Numbers can be tricky for girls like you. Girls like me." Even at 7, I understood the implication. Girls with blonde curls and blue eyes. Girls who wore the frilly dresses my grandmother insisted on buying. Girls who looked like they belonged in a beauty pageant, not a science lab. That afternoon, I marched home to our modest 2-bedroom apartment where my single mother, Rebecca, was bent over nursing textbooks at our kitchen table. She was working toward her RN degree while juggling 2 part-time jobs, cleaning offices at night and serving lunch at the local diner during the day. Her own dreams had been deferred by teenage pregnancy, but she was determined that mine wouldn't be. "Mom," I announced, dropping my backpack with theatrical flair, "Mrs. Henderson thinks I'm too pretty to be good at math." Rebecca looked up from her anatomy diagrams, exhaustion temporarily replaced by fierce maternal instinct. "What did you just say?" I explained the entire interaction, watching my mother's jaw tighten with each detail. Rebecca had grown up in rural Nebraska, where being pretty meant you got married young and being smart meant you got ideas above your station. She'd fought tooth and nail to escape that narrative, and she wasn't about to let anyone impose it on her daughter. The next morning, Rebecca marched into Riverside Elementary wearing her best dress, the navy blue one she saved for job interviews, and requested a meeting with Mrs. Henderson and the principal. I waited in the hallway, pressing my ear against the door, catching fragments of heated conversation. "My daughter's intelligence is not up for debate. Perhaps you're projecting your own limitations. Expect her to be challenged." Appropriately, when Rebecca emerged 20 minutes later, her cheeks were flushed but her eyes were triumphant. Mrs. Henderson never questioned my math abilities again. In fact, she seemed to go out of her way to avoid calling me altogether, but the seed of doubt had been planted, and it would grow in the most unexpected places. Middle school brought new challenges. Jefferson Middle School was larger, more diverse, and theoretically more progressive than my elementary school. I threw myself into academics with the fervor of someone trying to prove a point. Advanced classes, science fairs, math competitions, I tackled everything with determination that bordered on obsession, yet with each academic success came subtle undermining. When I won the 7th grade science fair with a project on photosynthesis efficiency in different light spectrums, my biology teacher, Mr. Rodriguez, made a point of mentioning to other parents that I'd clearly had a lot of help at home. Never mind that Rebecca barely had time to help me with basic homework, let alone complex scientific experiments. When I scored in the 99th percentile on standardized tests, the guidance counselor, Mrs. Patterson, suggested I might want to consider more balanced course loads. "You don't want to overwhelm yourself, dear. There are so many other activities that might suit your natural gifts." Natural gifts. Another euphemism I was learning to despise. The breaking point came in 8th grade, during a particularly challenging algebra class taught by Mr. Davidson, a stern man in his 50s who prided himself on mathematical precision. I was one of only 3 students who'd mastered quadratic equations, consistently earning perfect scores on weekly quizzes. During parent-teacher conferences, Mr. Davidson pulled Rebecca aside. I wasn't supposed to overhear, but I developed a talent for strategic eavesdropping. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said in his gravelly voice, "I need to discuss Sophia's performance." Rebecca tensed, preparing for criticism. "Is there a problem with her grades?" "On the contrary, her grades are exceptional. Too exceptional." He paused meaningfully. I've been teaching for 28 years, and I've noticed certain patterns. Students who look like Sophia, attractive, well-groomed, popular with their peers, don't typically excel in abstract mathematical concepts. It suggests outside assistance. The silence stretched so long I wondered if they'd somehow left the room. Finally, Rebecca spoke, her voice deadly quiet. Are you suggesting my 14-year-old daughter is cheating? I'm suggesting that someone is doing her homework. Perhaps a tutor, perhaps a parent with advanced mathematical knowledge. I'd like to recommend additional testing to verify her capabilities. What Mr. Davidson didn't know was that Rebecca had been awake until 2 a.m. the previous night, learning algebra alongside me. Not to help with my homework, but to understand what I was learning so she could share in my excitement about mathematical concepts. She'd been teaching herself from library books and online tutorials, turning our kitchen table into a study hall where we'd work through problems together, not because I needed help, but because she wanted to be part of my academic journey. You want to test my daughter's intelligence because she's pretty? Rebecca's voice had risen to a level that made other parents turn and stare. I want to ensure academic integrity, no. The word came out like a gunshot. You want to tear down a young girl because she doesn't fit your narrow perception of what intelligence looks like. You want to punish her for having the audacity to be both smart and attractive, as if those two qualities are mutually exclusive. Rebecca's voice carried down the hallway, drawing the attention of other teachers and parents. My daughter spends 3 hours every night on homework. She reads scientific journals for fun. She builds circuit boards in her bedroom and explains quantum physics concepts to me over breakfast. If you can't see her intelligence, that's your failing, not hers. Mr. Davidson's face had gone red. Mrs. Mitchell, I understand you're defensive, but I'm not defensive. I'm angry. I'm angry that in 2009, we still have educators who believe a girl can't be beautiful and brilliant. I'm angry that you've made my daughter feel like she has to choose between being valued for her mind or her appearance. And I'm furious that you've wasted both our time with this conversation instead of focusing on how to challenge her academically. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Within a week, I was transferred to an advanced mathematics program at the local high school, taking classes with juniors and seniors while still in 8th grade. Mr. Davidson never spoke to me again, which suited me fine, but the pattern was established. Every academic achievement would be scrutinized, questioned, attributed to someone else. Every success would come with whispered doubts and raised eyebrows. I was learning that being underestimated was both a burden and a weapon. High school at Denver West Academy was supposed to be different. It was a magnet school focused on STEM education, drawing students from across the district who were serious about science and mathematics. I assumed I'd finally found my tribe, kids who valued intellectual curiosity over social hierarchies. I was wrong. If anything, the bias was more sophisticated here. Teachers didn't openly question my intelligence, but they found subtler ways to undermine it. When I raised my hand in AP Chemistry, Dr. Williams would nod politely and then rephrase my question as if I'd asked something entirely different. When I submitted research papers, they'd come back with suggestions to simplify my language or focus on more accessible topics. The other students were no better. The academic elite of Denver West had their own hierarchies, and I didn't fit neatly into any category. I was too smart for the popular kids, too pretty for the science nerds, and too serious for anyone who might have appreciated both qualities. Sarah Chen, valedictorian candidate and president of the Science Honor Society, made her position clear. During our junior year, we were both competing for early admission to MIT, and the tension had been building for months. You know, she said one afternoon in the chemistry lab, carefully measuring solutions while I calibrated equipment, it must be nice to have natural advantages in the college application process. I looked up from my calculations. What do you mean? Oh, come on, Sophia. You're gorgeous, you photograph well, you interview beautifully. Admissions officers are human. They respond to certain qualities. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off, the implication hung in the air like toxic gas. My acceptance to MIT, if it came, wouldn't be based on my 4.0 GPA, my perfect SAT scores, or my groundbreaking research on antibiotic-resistant bacteria. It would be because I looked good in application photos. Sarah, I said carefully, I've spent the last 4 years maintaining a perfect academic record while conducting independent research and leading 3 different academic clubs. If you think my appearance is what's going to get me into MIT, you're severely underestimating both me and the admissions committee. She shrugged, returning to her titration with exaggerated focus. I'm just saying, some of us have to rely solely on our intellectual merits. It's a different kind of pressure. That night, I sat in my bedroom surrounded by acceptance letters from 17 different universities. Full scholarships to Stanford, Harvard, Princeton, MIT, Caltech, institutions that had recognized something in my applications that my high school peers couldn't see. Each letter represented thousands of hours of study, countless nights of research, and a dedication to academic excellence that had cost me most of my social life, yet Sarah's words echoed in my mind. Would people always assume my successes came from my appearance rather than my abilities? Would every achievement be tainted by the suggestion that I'd somehow taken shortcuts unavailable to others? I picked up my acceptance letter from MIT, reading it for the 100th time. Full academic scholarship. Research assistantship with Dr. Elena Vasquez, one of the leading biochemists in the country. A spot in the prestigious honors program reserved for the top 1% of incoming students. Still, doubt crept in. Had they seen my photograph? Had my appearance influenced their decision in ways I'd never know? Rebecca found me there hours later, surrounded by papers and lost in thought. Second thoughts, she asked, settling on the edge of my bed. Do you think they're right? I asked without looking up. Do you think being pretty makes everything easier? Rebecca was quiet for a long moment. Sophia, I've watched you work harder than any kid should have to work. I've seen you sacrifice social events to study, miss parties to conduct research, and spend weekends in libraries while your classmates were at movies. If someone thinks your appearance is what got you into MIT, they haven't been paying attention. She picked up one of the acceptance letters, scanning the formal language with pride. But I'll tell you something else. Even if your appearance did open doors, which I don't believe it did, you still have to walk through them. You still have to prove yourself once you get there. And you've been doing that your entire life. I looked at my mother, seeing the exhaustion in her eyes from years of working multiple jobs, the determination that had carried her through nursing school while raising me alone, the fierce love that had made her fight every teacher who'd tried to limit my potential. What if I can't prove myself at MIT? What if I really am just a pretty face who got lucky? Rebecca's laugh was sharp and sudden. Honey, you've been proving yourself since you were 7 years old. The only question now is whether you're going to let other people's limitations become your own. The next morning, I mailed my acceptance letter to MIT. 3 months later, I graduated as valedictorian of Denver West Academy, despite Sarah Chen's best efforts. My speech focused on the importance of challenging assumptions about others and about ourselves. I didn't mention the whispered conversations I'd overheard after the ceremony, where parents speculated about whether I'd earned my position or simply looked the part. I didn't address the subtle suggestions that my success was somehow less legitimate than that of my classmates. Instead, I focused on the future. MIT was waiting, and with it, the chance to prove once and for all that intelligence and beauty weren't mutually exclusive. I was 18 years old, armed with a perfect academic record and a chip on my shoulder the size of Colorado. I had no idea that the real battles were just beginning. MIT's campus sprawled before me like a concrete promise of intellectual freedom. September air carried the scent of possibility mixed with exhaust from Massachusetts Avenue. After years of fighting for recognition in Denver, I'd finally arrived at a place where brilliance was the currency and academic achievement the ultimate status symbol. Or so I thought. Dr. Elena Vasquez's biochemistry lab occupied the entire third floor of the Koch Institute, a gleaming monument to cutting-edge research. Walking through those doors on my first day as a research assistant, I felt like I was entering a cathedral of science. Equipment worth millions of dollars hummed with precision, graduate students moved with purpose between workstations, and the air itself seemed charged with discovery. You must be Mitchell, Dr. Vasquez said without looking up from her microscope. She was a compact woman in her 50s, with steel gray hair pulled back in a practical bun and the kind of intense focus that made Nobel Prize winners. I've reviewed your high school research on antibiotic resistance. Competent work for a teenager. Competent. The word stung more than any outright criticism. I'd spent 2 years developing novel testing protocols that had earned recognition from the Colorado Science Fair, publication in a peer-reviewed journal, and glowing recommendations from 3 different university professors. Competent felt like a slap. Thank you, Dr. Vasquez. I'm excited to contribute to your current projects. She finally looked up, her dark eyes assessing me with clinical detachment. Yes, well, we'll start you on basic protocols. Data entry, sample preparation, equipment cleaning. The fundamentals. Around me, other research assistants were designing experiments, analyzing complex datasets, and presenting findings to visiting researchers. I was handed a mop and a bottle of lab-grade disinfectant. Is there something wrong with my credentials? I asked after my 3rd week of glorified janitorial work. Dr. Vasquez glanced up from her computer screen with barely concealed irritation. Mitchell, research is built on discipline and attention to detail. Every Nobel laureate started by mastering the basics. Perhaps you expected special treatment? Special treatment. The phrase followed me everywhere, whispered in lecture halls, and muttered in study groups. When I scored the highest grade on our first organic chemistry exam, my lab partner James Rodriguez suggested I must have charmed Professor Chen into giving me advance copies of the questions. When I solved a complex thermodynamics problem that had stumped half the class, study group leader Amanda Foster wondered aloud if I'd had help from upperclassmen who found me approachable. The social dynamics at MIT were more complex than anything I'd faced in high school. Here, being smart was assumed, but being both smart and attractive created a different kind of suspicion. Male classmates either dismissed me as I candy-hooed, somehow slipped through admissions, or they became overly helpful in ways that felt condescending rather than collaborative. You know, said Brad Thompson, a junior from Massachusetts who'd appointed himself unofficial spokesperson for our study group, you might want to consider switching to a less demanding major. Chemical engineering is really brutal, and there are plenty of other paths that might be more suitable. We were sitting in the library at 11 p.m., surrounded by textbooks and empty coffee cups, working through problem sets that were due the next morning. I'd finished mine 2 hours earlier and was now helping 3 other students understand concepts they'd been struggling with all week. What makes you think chemical engineering isn't suitable for me? I asked, not looking up from the equation. I was explaining to Sarah Kim, a brilliant sophomore who'd been stuck on thermodynamic cycles. Brad's laugh was uncomfortable. Come on, Sophia. No judgment, but you're clearly not the typical MIT student. You're more, I don't know, approachable? Social? Maybe you'd be happier in something like communications or psychology. Sarah looked between us, her pen frozen mid-calculation. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a spectrometer. Brad, I said carefully, I scored 780 on the SAT math section, 800 on chemistry, and 790 on physics. I've been published in the Journal of Adolescent Scientific Research. I'm currently maintaining a 3.97 GPA while working 20 hours a week in a research lab. What exactly about my academic performance suggests I should switch majors? It's not about performance, Brad backpedaled, his face reddening. It's about fit. Culture. You know what I mean. I knew exactly what he meant. I didn't look like I belonged in the Koch Institute at 2 a.m., hair pulled back in a messy bun, safety goggles leaving marks around my eyes, clothes stained with chemical reagents. I didn't fit the stereotype of the obsessed, socially awkward genius who lived and breathed science to the exclusion of everything else. The irony was that I did live and breathe science. I'd chosen MIT specifically to escape the limitations others had tried to impose on me, only to discover that even here, my appearance was seen as incompatible with serious academic pursuit. Winter in Cambridge brought a brutal cold and a new level of academic intensity. Dr. Vasquez's research team was racing toward a breakthrough in targeted cancer therapy, and the pressure was mounting. 18-hour days became normal, fueled by determination and industrial-strength coffee. Finally, after months of basic tasks, I was assigned to work on actual research, analyzing protein structures that might serve as drug targets. The work was intricate, requiring both theoretical knowledge and practical laboratory skills. I threw myself into it with the passion of someone who'd been waiting her entire life for this opportunity. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday evening in February. I was alone in the lab, running my 15th iteration of a protein binding assay, when the results appeared on my screen. The binding affinity was unlike anything we'd seen before, a potential therapeutic target that could revolutionize treatment for pancreatic cancer. I triple-checked the data, ran the analysis again, and verified the results using 2 different methodologies. The numbers were consistent, groundbreaking, and undeniably significant. Heart pounding, I printed the results and rushed to find Dr. Vasquez. She was in her office, grading papers under the harsh fluorescent lights. I knocked softly, trying to contain my excitement. Dr. Vasquez? I think I found something important. She looked up with the weary expression of someone who'd heard similar claims from dozens of overeager undergraduates. What is it, Mitchell? I spread the printouts across her desk, explaining the methodology, the unexpected results, and the potential implications. As I spoke, I watched her expression change from skeptical to surprised to genuinely interested. These binding affinities, she said, leaning forward to study the data more closely. You're certain about the experimental conditions? Absolutely. I've verified everything multiple times. The protein shows remarkable selectivity for cancer cells while leaving healthy tissue largely unaffected. Dr. Vasquez was quiet for a long moment, her eyes moving between the data sheets and her computer screen. Finally, she looked up at me with something approaching respect. This is significant work, Mitchell. Potentially groundbreaking. She paused, then added almost reluctantly, I may have underestimated your capabilities. The admission should have felt like victory, but it was tinged with frustration. How many months had I spent cleaning glassware and organizing chemical inventories while my potential went unrecognized? How many other opportunities had I missed because someone couldn't see past my appearance to my abilities? Dr. Vasquez, I said carefully, I'd like to expand this research. Design a full experimental protocol, test additional protein variants, maybe even begin preliminary drug design. She nodded slowly. Yes, I think that would be appropriate. I'll assign you to the advanced research team. You'll be working directly with our graduate students and postdocs. Walking back to my dormitory that night, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Pride in my scientific achievement, frustration at the time it had taken to be recognized, and determination. To prove that this breakthrough wasn't a fluke, the advanced research team was a different world entirely. Led by Dr. Michael Stevens, a brilliant postdoc who'd already published 12 papers in major journals, the team treated each other as intellectual equals regardless of their position in the academic hierarchy. For the first time since arriving at MIT, I felt like I was judged purely on the quality of my ideas and the rigor of my work. Sophia's protein binding research is extraordinary, Dr. Stevens announced during our first team meeting. We're going to build our entire spring research focus around her findings. Around the table, 5 graduate students and 2 other undergraduates nodded with genuine interest. No one questioned whether I'd received help, no one suggested the results were too sophisticated for someone my age, and no one made comments about my appearance. They were interested in one thing, science. Over the following months, our team expanded my initial discovery into a comprehensive research program. We identified 17 different protein variants, developed novel synthesis pathways, and began preliminary testing of potential therapeutic compounds. The work was intense, intellectually demanding, and absolutely thrilling. I was spending so much time in the lab that I barely noticed when spring arrived in Cambridge. My social life consisted entirely of scientific discussions, my wardrobe had been reduced to lab-safe clothing, and my idea of entertainment was reading the latest papers in Nature and Science. It was during this period of intense focus that I encountered Dr. Marcus Chen. Chen taught advanced organic chemistry, a notoriously difficult course that served as a gateway to upper-level chemical research. He was known for his brilliance, his demanding standards, and his ability to identify students who had what it took to succeed in academic chemistry. He was also known for his opinions about women in science. Chemistry, he announced on the first day of class, is not a field for the faint of heart. It requires absolute dedication, intellectual rigor, and the ability to think in 3 dimensions about molecular structures that exist only in theoretical space. Some of you will excel. Others will find that their talents lie elsewhere. His eyes swept the classroom, lingering on the female students with what seemed like skeptical assessment. When his gaze reached me, I saw something I'd encountered countless times before, the automatic assumption that I didn't belong. The first exam was a brutal affair, 4 hours of complex synthesis problems, reaction mechanisms, and theoretical calculations. I'd spent weeks preparing, working through every problem set, mastering every concept, and drilling reaction pathways until I could draw them in my sleep. When Dr. Chen handed back the graded exams a week later, his expression was carefully neutral. The results were interesting, he said. One student scored significantly higher than the rest. An unusual outcome for such a challenging examination. He called out names and grades, working his way through the class. When he reached my name, he paused. Mitchell. See me after class. My heart sank. I'd been here before, the suspicious professor, the suggestion of cheating, the assumption that my results were somehow illegitimate. Around me, other students were comparing their scores, celebrating successful grades or commiserating over difficult questions. I'd earned a 98, the highest score in the class, but instead of celebration, I felt the familiar weight of having to defend my intelligence. After the other students filed out, Dr. Chen approached my desk with my exam in hand. His expression was unreadable, but I could sense the skepticism radiating from him like heat from a Bunsen burner. Miss Mitchell, he began, his voice carefully controlled, your performance on this examination was exceptional. Thank you, Dr. Chen. Perhaps too exceptional. He placed the exam on my desk, pointing to several particularly complex problems. These synthesis pathways, for instance. They require a level of 3-dimensional thinking that typically takes years to develop. The reaction mechanisms you've proposed are not only correct but elegantly simplified. It's the kind of work I'd expect from a graduate student, not a sophomore. I felt the walls closing in around me, the familiar sensation of having to prove myself all over again. I studied extensively, Dr. Chen. I've been working in Dr. Vasquez's lab for 8 months, and I've had practical experience with many of these reaction types. He picked up the exam, studying it more closely. Tell me, Miss Mitchell, what resources did you use to prepare for this examination? The question was loaded with implication. He wasn't asking about textbooks or study guides, he was asking if I'd received unauthorized help, if someone had given me advance copies of the questions, if my success was anything other than legitimate. I used the assigned textbook, worked through all the problem sets, attended every lecture and recitation, and spent approximately 40 hours reviewing the material, I said, my voice steady despite the anger building in my chest. And you did all of this preparation, independently? Yes, Dr. Chen. I worked independently. He was quiet for a long moment, his eyes moving between my face and the exam results. I could see the internal struggle playing out, the evidence of my capabilities conflicting with his preconceptions about what a student like me could achieve. Miss Mitchell, he said finally, I've been teaching chemistry for 15 years. In my experience, students who look like you typically struggle with the abstract concepts required for advanced organic chemistry. You're clearly an attractive young woman, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it does raise questions about your priorities and focus. The words hit me like a physical blow. Here, at MIT, surrounded by the supposed intellectual elite of the world, I was still being judged by my appearance rather than my abilities. Dr. Chen, I said, my voice barely controlled, are you suggesting that my appearance somehow disqualifies me from understanding organic chemistry? I'm suggesting that students who spend significant time on their appearance often have less time for serious academic pursuits. Your perfect makeup, styled hair, and fashionable clothing indicate priorities that might not align with the dedication required for advanced scientific study. I looked down at myself, jeans and a simple sweater, minimal makeup, hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. If this constituted fashionable styling, Dr. Chen's expectations for female students were truly medieval. Dr. Chen, would you like me to retake the exam under supervised conditions? The challenge hung in the air between us. Either he believed I was capable of this level of work, or he didn't. Either he was willing to judge me on my abilities, or he would continue to let his biases cloud his judgment. That won't be necessary, he said after a long pause. But I'll be watching your performance very carefully going forward. Excellence in chemistry requires consistency, and I have serious doubts about whether you can maintain this level of work. Walking out of that classroom, I made a decision that would shape the rest of my academic career. I would not only maintain this level of work, I would exceed it. I would become so undeniably excellent that even Dr. Marcus Chen would have to acknowledge my abilities. I had no idea that this moment would plant the seeds of something much larger, a determination to prove not just my own worth, but to change the entire system that had consistently underestimated people like me. The real work was just beginning. Dr. Chen's skepticism became my fuel. Every lecture, every assignment, every interaction was a battlefield where I had to prove my worth anew. He never openly accused me of cheating again, but his doubt hung over the classroom like toxic vapor, poisoning every achievement. The second exam arrived 3 weeks later. This time, I knew I was under a microscope. Dr. Chen positioned himself at the front of the room with arms crossed, his gaze returning to me every few minutes as if he expected to catch me in some act of academic dishonesty. Other students noticed the attention, whispering among themselves about why the professor seemed so focused on one particular student. I completed the exam in 2 hours, double-checked every calculation, and handed it in with the quiet confidence of someone who'd mastered every concept. When Dr. Chen announced the results a week later, his voice carried a note of resignation. Mitchell, 97. The highest score in the class. Again. This time, he didn't ask to see me after class. Instead, he began assigning increasingly complex problems specifically to me during lectures. Synthesis pathways that would challenge graduate students. Reaction mechanisms that required drawing on knowledge from multiple subfields of chemistry. Theoretical calculations that pushed the boundaries of undergraduate coursework. I welcomed every challenge. Each impossible problem became a puzzle to solve, each skeptical glance became motivation to excel further. My classmates began seeking me out for help, forming study groups around my explanations, and gradually, even Dr. Chen's hostility couldn't diminish the growing recognition of my abilities. But recognition in one classroom didn't solve the broader problem. MIT's culture of brilliance came with its own forms of discrimination, more subtle but equally damaging than what I'd faced in high school. Professor Janet Liu's physical chemistry course was legendary for destroying the confidence of overachieving students. The mathematics was brutal, quantum mechanics applied to molecular systems, statistical thermodynamics, and spectroscopy that required thinking in dimensions most people couldn't visualize. Half the class typically dropped out within the first month. During our third week, Professor Liu assigned a particularly challenging problem set involving molecular orbital theory. I spent 14 hours working through the calculations, deriving equations from first principles, and creating three-dimensional models to visualize electron density distributions. The work was exhausting but exhilarating, exactly the kind of intellectual challenge I'd come to MIT to find. When I arrived at class the next day, I discovered that I was the only student who'd completed all 10 problems correctly. Professor Liu's announcement sparked murmurs throughout the classroom. Miss Mitchell's solutions demonstrate exceptional mathematical sophistication, she said, holding up my problem set. However, I'm concerned about the level of detail in her derivations. They suggest access to graduate-level resources that might not be appropriate for this course level. My stomach dropped. Once again, excellence was being interpreted as evidence of impropriety rather than ability. Professor Liu, I said, raising my hand, could you specify which aspects of my solutions concern you? She flipped through my pages, pointing to several complex derivations. These mathematical techniques, for instance. The integration methods you've used are typically covered in advanced quantum chemistry courses. Where did you learn them? I taught them to myself from library references. When I encountered integrals I couldn't solve with standard methods, I researched more sophisticated approaches. The classroom fell silent. Other students shifted uncomfortably, sensing the accusatory undertone of the conversation. Self-taught. Advanced mathematical techniques, Professor Liu repeated, her skepticism evident. In your spare time? Yes, ma'am. I find mathematics fascinating, and I wanted to understand the underlying principles rather than just memorizing formulas. Professor Liu studied me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Miss Mitchell, I'd like you to work through problem 7 on the board. Show us your derivation process in real time. Walking to the front of the classroom felt like walking to an execution. 40 pairs of eyes followed my movement, some curious, others sympathetic, a few openly hostile. I picked up the chalk and began working through the quantum mechanical calculations step by step, explaining each transformation, each approximation, each mathematical technique. The derivation took 25 minutes. When I finished, the board was covered with equations that told the story of molecular behavior at the atomic level. Behind me, the classroom was absolutely silent. Thank you, Miss Mitchell, Professor Liu said quietly. That was comprehensive. You may return to your seat. I walked back to my desk on unsteady legs, aware that I'd just performed intellectual combat in front of my peers. Some looked impressed, others confused, and a few seemed resentful that I'd been singled out for such intense scrutiny. After class, Professor Liu approached me privately. Miss Mitchell, I owe you an apology. Your work is legitimate and remarkable. I allowed my assumptions to cloud my judgment. What assumptions were those, Professor? She hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. In my experience, students who present themselves as you do rarely possess the mathematical sophistication you've demonstrated. I was wrong to question your capabilities. Another backhanded acknowledgement. Even when professors recognized my abilities, they couldn't resist commenting on how unexpected they found the combination of intelligence and appearance. That evening, I called my mother from my dorm room, emotionally exhausted from another day of having to prove myself. They keep acting like I'm some kind of puzzle they can't solve, I told Rebecca, sprawled across my narrow bed with textbooks scattered around me. As if being smart and looking normal are mutually exclusive. How are your grades? She asked, cutting through my frustration with practical concern. Perfect. 4.0 GPA, top of every class, research publication pending approval. Then you're winning, Sophia. Every time they doubt you and you prove them wrong, you're changing their understanding of what intelligence looks like. But I'm exhausted, Mom. I shouldn't have to fight this hard just to be taken seriously. Rebecca was quiet for a moment. No, you shouldn't. But you are fighting, and you're winning, and every battle you win makes it easier for the next girl who looks like you and thinks like you. Her words stayed with me through the remainder of my sophomore year. I began to see my struggles not as personal failures but as part of a larger pattern of systemic bias that needed to be challenged systematically rather than individually. Junior year brought new opportunities and familiar obstacles. I'd been accepted into MIT's most prestigious research program, working directly with Dr. Amanda Foster on cutting-edge nanotechnology applications in drug delivery. The research was groundbreaking, potentially worth millions in pharmaceutical applications, and intensely competitive. Dr. Foster was different from my previous mentors, a woman in her early 40s who'd navigated her own path through academic bias and emerged as one of the leading researchers in her field. I hoped she'd understand the challenges I faced in ways that male professors couldn't. I was wrong. Sophia, she said during our first private meeting, I want to be direct with you. This research program attracts significant attention from pharmaceutical companies, venture capitalists, and media outlets. The work we're doing will likely result in patent applications worth substantial amounts of money. I nodded, excited about the commercial potential of our research. Given the high-profile nature of this work, I need team members who will be taken seriously by industry professionals. People who embody the gravitas and intellectual credibility that our research deserves. A cold sensation spread through my chest. Dr. Foster, are you suggesting I don't embody intellectual credibility? I'm suggesting that appearance matters in professional settings, whether we like it or not. When we present our findings to pharmaceutical executives, when we apply for patents, when we interface with investors, we need to be perceived as serious scientists first and foremost. And you don't think I'll be perceived that way? Dr. Foster shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Sophia, you're undoubtedly brilliant. Your academic record speaks for itself. But you're also striking. In certain professional contexts, that can be a distraction from the scientific message. I stared at her, processing the implications. You're removing me from the research team because I'm too attractive? I'm not removing you. I'm suggesting you might be happier in a different research track. Something less visible, less commercial. Pure research rather than applied development. The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, but I'd already made my decision. If Dr. Foster couldn't see past my appearance to recognize my scientific value, she didn't deserve to benefit from my contributions. I withdrew from her research program that afternoon and requested a transfer to Dr. Robert Zhang's theoretical chemistry lab. Dr. Zhang was known for his demanding standards, his brilliant insights, and his complete indifference to anything that didn't directly relate to molecular science. Our first meeting lasted less than 5 minutes. Mitchell, I've reviewed your academic record and your research publications. Impressive work for an undergraduate. Can you start Monday? No comments about my appearance, no concerns about professional credibility, no suggestions that I might be better suited for less demanding work. Just an assessment of my capabilities and an invitation to contribute. Dr. Zhang's lab became my sanctuary. Working on theoretical models of molecular behavior, I could lose myself in the pure mathematics of chemical systems. No industry executives to impress, no commercial applications to consider, just the elegant beauty of scientific truth. It was in Dr. Zhang's lab that I developed the theoretical framework that would later become the foundation of my greatest professional achievement. Working with quantum mechanical models of drug-protein interactions, I discovered mathematical relationships that could predict therapeutic effectiveness with unprecedented accuracy. The work was abstract, theoretical, and absolutely revolutionary. Within 6 months, I'd published 3 papers in major journals, presented findings at 2 international conferences, and attracted attention from researchers around the world, but even success in theoretical chemistry couldn't shield me from the broader patterns of discrimination that pervaded academic culture. The incident that crystallized my determination occurred during my senior year, at the annual American Chemical Society conference in San Francisco. I was scheduled to present my research on predictive modeling of drug effectiveness, work that represented 4 years of intensive study and had already been recognized as groundbreaking by the international scientific community. The presentation was scheduled for the main auditorium, prime time, with an expected audience of over 500 chemists, pharmaceutical researchers, and industry executives. It was the kind of opportunity that could launch a career, establish professional credibility, and open doors to graduate programs, research positions, and funding opportunities. I'd spent weeks preparing, rehearsing every slide, anticipating every possible question, and polishing my delivery until it was flawless. My research advisor, Dr. Zhang, had expressed complete confidence in both my work and my ability to present it effectively. 30 minutes before my scheduled presentation, I was approached by Dr. Harold Brennan, the conference organizer and a senior figure in academic chemistry. Miss Mitchell, we need to discuss a scheduling change. I looked up from my laptop, where I'd been making final adjustments to my presentation slides. What kind of change? We're moving your presentation to the smaller conference room. Concurrent session rather than plenary lecture. The concurrent session room held maybe 75 people, was scheduled during lunch when attendance would be minimal, and carried none of the prestige of the main auditorium presentation. Why? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Dr. Brennan looked uncomfortable. The conference committee felt that your presentation might be better suited to a more intimate setting, given the subject matter and the presenter demographics. Presenter demographics? Miss Mitchell, you're a very attractive young woman presenting highly technical material to an audience of senior scientists and industry professionals. The committee is concerned about potential distractions from the scientific content. I felt the familiar rage building, but this time it was colder, more focused. Dr. Brennan, are you suggesting that my appearance will distract from my scientific findings? I'm suggesting that we want to ensure your research receives the serious attention it deserves, in an appropriate context. Around us, other presenters were setting up equipment, reviewing notes, and preparing for their own lectures. Male graduate students, postdocs, and junior faculty members who would present their work in the main auditorium without anyone questioning whether their appearance might create distractions. Dr. Brennan, I said, closing my laptop with deliberate care, my research represents 4 years of intensive work, has been published in 3 major journals, and has already attracted interest from pharmaceutical companies worth billions of dollars. If your audience can't focus on scientific content because they're distracted by the person presenting it, perhaps the problem isn't with the presenter. Miss Mitchell, I understand you're disappointed, but I'm not disappointed. Dr. Brennan, I'm finished. I packed my materials, walked out of the conference center, and spent the afternoon walking along San Francisco Bay, making plans that would change the trajectory of my entire career. That evening, I called Dr. Zhang from my hotel room. Sophia, I heard about the presentation change. Unconscionable decision by the conference committee. Dr. Zhang, I've made a decision about graduate school. Oh? Which program have you chosen? None of them. I'm not going to graduate school. The silence stretched across the phone line. Sophia, you're one of the most promising young chemists I've ever worked with. Academic research is your natural path. Academic research is a system that will never fully accept me. I've spent 4 years proving myself over and over again, and it's never enough. There will always be another conference committee, another professor, another opportunity denied. Because someone can't see past my appearance to my abilities. What will you do instead? I looked out my hotel window at the lights of San Francisco, thinking about the pharmaceutical executives who'd expressed interest in my research, the venture capitalists who'd approached me after my conference presentations. The entire world of commercial science that existed outside the ivory tower of academia. I'm going to change the system from the outside. I'm going to become so successful, so wealthy, so influential that I can fund the research I believe in and support the scientists who deserve recognition. That's quite an ambitious plan for a 22-year-old. Dr. Brennan made one correct assessment today, I said. My research is worth billions of dollars. The only question is whether I'll let someone else profit from it while I fight for scraps of recognition, or whether I'll take control of my own destiny. Dr. Zhang was quiet for a long moment. If anyone can succeed at such an audacious plan, it would be you. But Sophia, don't let bitterness drive your decisions. The world needs brilliant scientists like you in research positions. The world needs systematic change more than it needs another graduate student fighting for recognition. I'm going to provide that change. Hanging up the phone, I opened my laptop and began researching patent applications, startup funding, and the legal frameworks for commercializing scientific research. By morning, I had the outline of a business plan that would transform my theoretical discoveries into practical applications worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I was about to discover that the challenges I'd faced in academic settings were merely preparation for the obstacles waiting in the business world. But I was also about to learn that success, real, undeniable, financially measurable success, was the most powerful form of vindication available. The real battle was just beginning, but for the first time in my life, I would be fighting on my own terms. Boston's venture capital scene felt like a different planet after 4 years in MIT's academic bubble. Glass towers filled with men in expensive suits who spoke in acronyms and measured everything in terms of market potential and exit strategies. I'd traded my lab coat for business attire, but the skepticism in boardrooms was even more intense than anything I'd faced in lecture halls. My first pitch meeting was with Northbridge Capital, a prestigious firm known for backing breakthrough biotech companies. I'd spent 3 weeks perfecting my presentation, translating my theoretical research into business language that emphasized commercial applications and market opportunities. The partners sat around a mahogany table that probably cost more than my mother's annual salary, each one projecting the casual confidence that came with managing hundreds of millions in investment capital. Miss Mitchell, said Thomas Hartwell, the managing partner, walk us through your predictive modeling technology. For 45 minutes, I explained how my algorithms could revolutionize drug development by predicting therapeutic effectiveness before expensive clinical trials. The mathematics were elegant, the applications limitless, and the potential profits staggering. I'd done my homework. The global pharmaceutical market was worth over $300 billion annually, and my technology could save companies millions in development. Costs while accelerating life-saving treatments to market. When I finished, the room was quiet for nearly 30 seconds. Finally, Hartwell leaned back in his leather chair. Impressive presentation, Miss Mitchell. Very polished. Did you develop this pitch deck yourself? The question hit like a slap. Yes, Mr. Hartwell. I developed the technology, conducted the research, and created the business plan. He exchanged glances with his colleagues. The technical aspects are quite sophisticated. Perhaps you could tell us about your team? Who's handling the actual algorithm development? I am. I developed the algorithms myself, based on 4 years of research at MIT. Another partner, Jennifer Walsh, leaned forward. Sophia, may I call you Sophia? Biotech startups require significant technical expertise. While you've clearly done excellent work preparing this presentation, the actual implementation would require PhD-level computational chemistry knowledge. I have that knowledge. Do you? Or do you have advisors who've helped? You understand the concepts well enough to present them? The condescension was breathtaking. These people were treating me like an actress hired to deliver someone else's scientific work. Ms. Walsh, I said, my voice carefully controlled, I've published 6 peer-reviewed papers on this technology. I hold provisional patents on 3 different algorithmic approaches. I've been personally approached by pharmaceutical companies asking to license my research. What specific qualifications are you questioning? Hartwell intervened before Walsh could respond. Miss Mitchell, please. Don't misunderstand our questions. We're impressed by your presentation and your enthusiasm. But biotech investment requires careful due diligence. We need to understand the real technical capabilities behind the business plan. The real technical capabilities are sitting in front of you. Perhaps, said David Chen, another partner, but successful biotech companies require more than just technical knowledge. They need leadership experience, business acumen, and the credibility to attract top-tier talent. Frankly, you look more like someone we'd hire to pitch to investors than someone we'd trust to run a complex scientific enterprise. The room fell silent. The implication hung in the air like toxic gas. I was pretty enough to be the face of a company, but not smart enough to be its brain. I closed my laptop with deliberate precision. Gentlemen, Ms. Walsh, thank you for your time. I can see that Northbridge Capital isn't the right fit for this opportunity. Miss Mitchell, Hartwell called as I gathered my materials, we're not saying no. We're simply suggesting you might need a more experienced team before we can consider investment. You're suggesting I need men to validate my work before you'll take it seriously. I've heard that suggestion my entire life, and I've built my career on proving it wrong. Walking out of that conference room, I felt the familiar mixture of rage and determination that had fueled my academic success. But this time, something was different. In academia, I'd been dependent on professors and institutions for opportunities. In business, I could create my own opportunities. I spent the next 6 months learning everything I could about venture capital, patent law, and biotech commercialization. If traditional investors couldn't see the value in my work, I'd find alternative funding sources. The breakthrough came through an unexpected connection. Dr. Elizabeth Reeves, a former MIT professor who'd left academia to become a partner at Goldman Sachs, attended one of my presentations at a Boston biotech conference. Afterward, she approached me with a proposition that would change everything. Sophia, I've been following your research since your undergraduate publications. What you've developed isn't just scientifically impressive, it's potentially worth billions. We met the following week at her downtown office, 30 floors above the bustling financial district. Traditional VCs don't understand deep science, she explained. They invest in business models they can comprehend quickly. Your technology requires genuine expertise to evaluate, which most investors lack. So what do you suggest? Direct corporate partnerships. Pharmaceutical companies have the technical expertise to understand your work and the resources to fund development. Skip the middlemen and go straight to the decision makers. She was right. Within 3 months, I'd secured meetings with research directors at Pfizer, Merck, and Bristol-Myers Squibb. The conversations were completely different from my venture capital experiences. These were scientists talking to a scientist, evaluating technical merit rather than making assumptions based on appearance. Dr. Patricia Williams at Pfizer was the first to recognize the revolutionary potential of my algorithms. Miss Mitchell, this predictive modeling could transform our entire drug development pipeline. We're spending $2.6 billion annually on clinical trials, with a 90% failure rate. Your technology could identify the most promising compounds before we invest in expensive human studies. That's exactly the application I've been developing. We'd like to propose a licensing agreement. $50 million upfront, plus royalties on any drugs developed using your algorithms. $50 million. More money than I'd ever imagined, enough to fund my own research indefinitely, enough to prove definitively that my work had value regardless of what I looked like, but I'd learned something important during my months in the business world. Real power didn't come from selling your innovations to others, it came from controlling them yourself. Dr. Williams, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not interested in licensing my technology. I'm interested in partnership. What kind of partnership? Joint venture. I maintain ownership of the core algorithms while providing exclusive access to Pfizer for specific therapeutic areas. We share development costs and profits. The negotiation took 4 months. Pfizer's legal team tried every angle to acquire my technology outright, offering increasingly large sums for complete ownership. But I held firm. I'd spent too many years watching others profit from underestimating me to give away the most valuable thing I'd ever created. The final agreement was unprecedented, a $200 million joint venture that gave me 50% ownership while providing access to Pfizer's research infrastructure and clinical trial capabilities. At 23 years old, I became the youngest person ever to negotiate an equal partnership with a major pharmaceutical company. The announcement made headlines in the biotech industry. MIT grad partners with Pfizer in $200 million drug development deal. Revolutionary algorithm could transform pharmaceutical research. Young scientist breaks barriers in male-dominated industry. But the real satisfaction came from smaller, more personal moments. Dr. Marcus Chen sent a congratulatory email 2 days after the announcement. Sophia, I saw the news about your Pfizer partnership. Remarkable achievement. I must admit, I underestimated your potential during our time at MIT. Would you be interested in discussing research collaboration opportunities? I stared at the email for a long time, remembering the suspicion in his eyes, the condescending questions about my exam performance, the assumption that I didn't belong in his classroom. Now he wanted to collaborate, to associate himself with my success. My response was brief. Dr. Chen, thank you for your message. I'll keep your interest in mind for future opportunities. Best regards, Dr. Sophia Mitchell. Dr. Chen wasn't the only one who suddenly found my work interesting. Dr. Amanda Foster, who'd removed me from her research team because I might distract from serious science, requested a meeting to discuss potential partnerships. Professor Liu, who'd questioned whether I'd received unauthorized help with my problem sets, invited me to guest lecture in her physical chemistry course. Each request was a small vindication, proof that success could transform skepticism into respect faster than any amount of academic argument. But the real test came when I decided to expand beyond pharmaceutical partnerships into independent research funding. The Mitchell Institute for Advanced Chemical Research was my answer to every professor who'd underestimated a student, every conference committee that had relegated promising work to smaller venues, every institution that had let bias override scientific merit. I started with a $50 million endowment, funded from my Pfizer partnership profits. The mission was simple: identify and support exceptional scientific research regardless of the researcher's age, gender, appearance, or institutional affiliation. Our first round of grants attracted over 3,000 applications from around the world. Graduate students whose advisors wouldn't support their unconventional research. Postdocs who'd been passed over for faculty positions despite brilliant work. Established researchers pursuing high-risk, high-reward projects that traditional funding agencies wouldn't touch. The review process was revolutionary. All applications were evaluated blind, no names, no photographs, no institutional affiliations. Only the quality of the research proposal and the strength of the scientific methodology. Dr. Maria Santos was our first major success story. A brilliant young chemist at UC Berkeley, she'd been struggling to find funding for her work on sustainable plastic alternatives. Her advisor had suggested she focus on more practical research topics. Traditional grant agencies had rejected her proposals as too speculative. The Mitchell Institute awarded her $2 million for a 3-year research program. Within 18 months, she developed a biodegradable polymer that could replace traditional plastics in packaging applications. The technology was licensed to 3 major manufacturers, generating over $500 million in revenue while significantly reducing environmental impact. Dr. Santos wasn't an isolated case. Within 2 years, Mitchell Institute researchers had published 127 papers in major journals, filed 34 patents, and launched 12 successful biotech companies. We were proving that excellent science came from unexpected places when given proper support, but our most satisfying achievement was the Underestimated Researcher Award, a $10 million grant specifically for scientists who'd faced discrimination. or bias in traditional academic settings. The first recipient was Dr. Jennifer Kim, a Korean-American biochemist who'd been told by multiple professors that she was too quiet to succeed in science, that her communication style didn't fit American academic culture. With Mitchell Institute funding, she developed groundbreaking treatments for Alzheimer's disease that had eluded researchers for decades. The second recipient was Dr. Michael Rodriguez, a Latino physicist from a small state university who'd been rejected by every major research institution despite innovative work on quantum computing applications. His Mitchell Institute project resulted in computational breakthroughs that advanced the entire field by years. Each success story was personal validation, proof that the system's failures weren't isolated incidents but patterns that could be corrected with different approaches. The corporate world was taking notice. Other pharmaceutical companies began approaching me for partnerships. Tech giants wanted to license my algorithmic approaches for their own research programs. Investment firms that had once dismissed me were now competing for opportunities to fund my ventures. Most satisfying was a call from Thomas Hartwell at Northbridge Capital, the managing partner who'd questioned whether I had the credibility to run a scientific enterprise. "Sophia, I've been following your remarkable success with great interest. Northbridge would love to discuss investment opportunities in your future ventures." "Mr. Hartwell, I appreciate your interest, but I'm currently focusing on projects that align with my values and mission." Of course. Perhaps we could schedule a meeting to discuss how Northbridge might support the Mitchell Institute's important work." The same man who'd suggested I needed more experienced leadership was now asking to fund my organization. The irony was delicious, but I kept my voice professionally neutral. "I'll have my team review potential collaboration opportunities and get back to you." I never called him back. By my 25th birthday, the Mitchell Institute had distributed over $500 million in research grants, supported 200 scientists across 6 continents, and facilitated discoveries that were changing entire fields of study. My personal net worth had grown to over $800 million, making me one of the youngest self-made billionaires in the biotech industry, but money was never the real objective. The real objective was systemic change, creating a parallel infrastructure that could identify and support brilliant scientists regardless of whether they fit traditional expectations. The academic establishment was beginning to pay attention. MIT invited me to deliver the commencement address for the class of 2028. Harvard offered me an honorary doctorate. The American Chemical Society wanted to present me with their highest award for contributions to scientific advancement. Each invitation was an acknowledgement that the system I'd rejected was trying to claim credit for my success. The institutions that had failed to support me when I needed it were now eager to associate themselves with my achievements, but the real moment of vindication was still coming. Dr. Marcus Chen, the professor who'd questioned my intelligence, who'd watched my performance with suspicious eyes, who doubted my capabilities at every turn, was about to request funding for his most important research project. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning, marked urgent, requesting an emergency meeting to discuss a breakthrough cancer treatment that required immediate funding support. I smiled as I forwarded the message to my assistant with a simple instruction: schedule a meeting for next week. Full presentation required. After 15 years of proving myself to skeptics, I was finally in a position to make them prove themselves. To me, the tables were about to turn in the most satisfying way possible. The Mitchell Institute's conference room commanded a panoramic view of Boston Harbor, 35 floors above the city where I'd once been a struggling undergraduate. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the harbor where ships carried goods across the world, just as I now carried the power to shape scientific research across continents. Dr. Marcus Chen arrived precisely on time, carrying a leather briefcase and wearing the same confident expression I remembered from MIT lecture halls. He was older now, graying at the temples, but his posture still radiated the academic authority that had once intimidated me. My assistant escorted him into the conference room where I waited, flanked by my research directors and investment team. The power dynamic had shifted completely. He was the supplicant now, requesting support for his work. "Dr. Mitchell," he said, extending his hand with a practiced smile. "Thank you for making time in what I'm sure is an incredibly busy schedule." Dr. Chen, please, have a seat. "I understand you have a research proposal that requires significant funding." He settled into the chair across from me, placing his briefcase on the polished table with careful precision. "Indeed. I'm working on what could be the most important cancer research of the decade. Targeted therapy for pancreatic cancer using novel protein inhibitors." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "Tell me about your methodology." For the next hour, Dr. Chen presented his research with the enthusiasm of a man chasing scientific immortality. His work was genuinely impressive: innovative approaches to one of medicine's most challenging cancers, with the potential to save thousands of lives annually, but as he spoke, I found myself remembering a different conversation in his organic chemistry classroom 15 years earlier. The suspicious questions about my exam performance. The suggestion that I should focus on my strengths instead of pursuing complex scientific concepts. The assumption that students who looked like me couldn't possess the intellectual capabilities. He was now asking me to fund. The funding requirement is substantial, he concluded. $2.3 million over 3 years. But the potential impact is immeasurable. Dr. Chen, I said, leaning back in my chair, this is interesting research. However, I have some concerns about the principal investigator. His confident expression flickered slightly. Concerns? In my experience, researchers who've demonstrated bias in evaluating talent often lack the intellectual flexibility required for breakthrough discoveries. They miss obvious solutions because they can't see past their preconceptions. The room grew quiet. My research directors exchanged glances, understanding that this wasn't a typical funding evaluation. Dr. Mitchell, I'm not sure I understand your concern. Let me be specific. 15 years ago, you taught organic chemistry at MIT. You had a student who consistently earned the highest grades in your class, solved complex problems that challenged graduate students, and demonstrated exceptional understanding of molecular structures. Dr. Chen's face was carefully neutral, but I could see recognition dawning in his eyes. Instead of encouraging this student's obvious talent, you questioned their capabilities. You suggested they were receiving unauthorized help. You recommended they focus on simpler coursework more suited to their apparent limitations. Dr. Mitchell, that student was me, Dr. Chen. The silence stretched between us like a bridge spanning 15 years of vindication. He stared at me, processing the impossible transformation from the undergraduate he dismissed to the woman who now controlled funding for his life's work. I remember you, he said quietly. You were exceptional. Brilliant, actually. Yet, you treated me as if I were incapable of understanding the very concepts you're now asking me to fund. Dr. Chen shifted uncomfortably. Dr. Mitchell, I may have misjudged your capabilities. Academic environments can be challenging, and sometimes, experienced educators make assumptions that prove incorrect. Assumptions based on what, exactly? He hesitated, clearly aware that his next words would determine whether he received funding. Perhaps I allowed irrelevant factors to influence my professional judgment. Irrelevant factors like my appearance? Yes, he admitted, his voice barely audible. I was wrong. I studied his face, seeing genuine remorse mixed with desperate hope. His research truly was important. It could save lives, advance medical science, and fulfill the kind of mission that had driven me to create the Mitchell Institute. Dr. Chen, your research proposal will receive full funding. $2.3 million, as requested. Relief flooded his features. Thank you, Dr. Mitchell. I can't tell you how much this means, I'm not finished. My voice cut through his gratitude like a scalpel. The funding comes with conditions. He waited, hardly breathing. First, your research team must include at least 50% women and underrepresented minorities. Second, all publications must acknowledge the Mitchell Institute's commitment to supporting underestimated researchers. Third, you will personally mentor 3 undergraduate students who have faced discrimination in academic settings. Of course. Absolutely. Whatever you require. And finally, I said, standing to signal the end of our meeting, you will deliver a public lecture at MIT titled Recognizing Brilliance Beyond Bias, A Professor's Perspective on Inclusive Science. Dr. Chen nodded eagerly. I would be honored to give such a lecture. In your lecture, you will discuss how unconscious bias nearly cost you the opportunity to support a promising student's development. You will explain how that student's success demonstrates the importance of evaluating capabilities rather than appearances. Dr. Mitchell, I understand completely. This is more than fair. I walked him to the door, where my assistant waited with the funding documents. Dr. Chen, I hope your research succeeds brilliantly. Cancer patients deserve every possible avenue for treatment. After he left, I stood at the conference room windows, watching Boston Harbor and thinking about the journey that had brought me to this moment. 15 years of proving myself, building wealth, creating institutions, and systematically changing the landscape of scientific funding. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Saw the news about the Chen funding. Proud of you for supporting important research despite personal history. Rebecca understood what this moment meant, not just professional vindication, but the completion of a transformation that had begun in a second-grade classroom in Denver. I'd turned every slight, every assumption, every moment of being underestimated into fuel for something larger. The Mitchell Institute now supported over 500 researchers annually, with a $2 billion endowment that grew larger each year. We'd funded discoveries that led to new treatments for Alzheimer's disease, revolutionary advances in sustainable energy, and computational breakthroughs that accelerated artificial intelligence development. But our most important achievement wasn't any single discovery, it was the systematic proof that brilliant science emerges from diverse minds when given proper support. Half of our funded researchers were women. 60% came from underrepresented minorities. 30% had faced significant discrimination in traditional academic settings. Their combined work was reshaping entire fields of study. Dr. Jennifer Kim's Alzheimer's treatments had entered phase 3 clinical trials, showing unprecedented success in reversing cognitive decline. Dr. Michael Rodriguez's quantum computing advances had been licensed by 3 major tech companies, accelerating the development of quantum internet capabilities. Dr. Maria Santos's biodegradable plastics were now used by over 200 manufacturers worldwide, preventing millions of tons of environmental waste. Each success story validated the premise that had driven me since graduate school. The scientific establishment was systematically overlooking brilliant minds because they didn't fit narrow stereotypes of what genius looked like. 6 months after funding Dr. Chen's research, I received an invitation that completed the circle in the most satisfying way possible. MIT's Department of Chemistry wanted to establish the Sophia Mitchell Chair in Molecular Sciences, a permanent professorship funded by a $10 million endowment, designed to support innovative research by early career scientists. The ceremony was held in the same lecture hall where Dr. Chen had once questioned my capabilities. MIT's president delivered remarks about the importance of recognizing talent regardless of traditional expectations. The dean of the chemistry department spoke about how my success had inspired changes in faculty hiring and student evaluation practices, but the most meaningful moment came when Dr. Chen himself delivered the keynote address about unconscious bias in academic evaluation. He spoke with genuine conviction about the dangers of judging capabilities based on appearance, about the importance of creating inclusive research environments, and about how his own prejudices had nearly prevented him from recognizing exceptional talent. 15 years ago, he said to an audience of professors, graduate students, and industry leaders, I made assumptions about a student that nearly cost her, and science, immeasurable contributions. Today, that student funds research that will save thousands of lives. The lesson is clear: brilliance comes in many forms, and our responsibility as educators is to recognize and nurture it wherever we find it. After the ceremony, I walked across MIT's campus, past the buildings where I'd once fought for recognition, past the laboratories where I'd proven my capabilities against constant skepticism. Students hurried between classes, carrying backpacks and laptops, pursuing their own dreams of scientific discovery. Some of them probably faced the same challenges I'd encountered: professors who couldn't see past appearance to ability, funding committees that dismissed unconventional approaches, institutions that valued conformity over innovation. But now there was an alternative. The Mitchell Institute provided a path for exceptional minds to pursue breakthrough research regardless of whether they fit traditional expectations. We'd created a parallel system that valued scientific merit above everything else. My phone buzzed with another funding request, this one from a young researcher at Caltech who'd developed novel approaches to gene therapy but couldn't secure traditional funding because her methods were too radical for established grant agencies. I smiled as I forwarded the proposal to my research team with a note: fast track evaluation. This looks promising. At 28 years old, I controlled one of the world's largest private research foundations, had a net worth approaching $2 billion, and wielded more influence over scientific funding than most government agencies. But the real satisfaction wasn't in the money or power, it was in the knowledge that every grant we awarded, every researcher we supported, every discovery we enabled was proof that intelligence and beauty, ambition and appearance, brilliance, and any other arbitrary characteristic could coexist perfectly. They'd said I was too pretty to be smart. I'd proven them wrong in the most comprehensive way possible, not just by succeeding myself, but by creating systems that ensured other underestimated minds could succeed as well. The game had changed, and I'd written the new rules. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.